Hey everybody, welcome back to another video on the channel, and in today's video I want to talk about raids in Wizard101 and why I think they could be improved upon and why the current systems are a little bit problematic for most players in the game and even some of the higher percentage of players that participate in raids. So I'm going to structure this video in a way of, facts before the raid and then things actually inside the raid itself. So real quick, as a disclaimer, I just want to say my original guild, Dauntless Goats, was the second guild to ever beat the first raid. Ferric and I were literally neck and neck for world's first, so I have a pretty good and a lot of understanding of raids, and I've done a lot of them. Crying Sky Raid, I've been working on that with a bunch of new people as well. I do that over on Twitch if you want to check that out. I do like Crying Sky Raid. I think it's, highlights a lot of problems in terms of design, which I'll talk about later. But in general, I like how raids are challenging. I'm a guy that likes Souls games. I like harder content in general. However, I believe that content should be designed in a better manner, and it should be a little bit more accessible for most players. So right away here, let's get into, the first thing, which is, the gear before you even get into the raid, right? Because oftentimes when a new raid comes out, you see on Twitter, the gear gets leaked and you're like, oh my god, I need that piece, it will complete my setup, or I want to make a new setup with that new gear, like myself, for example. So a lot of the times the gear is desirable, right? So a most recent example is the Crying Sky Raid, Shabalba wand, I think, which is just the best wand in the game, because Aeon Sword with basically just Shad Chance, which in PvE is insane, and PvP is insane, so just like the best wand in the game, right? Or you might look back at Raid 1 with the Melody Robe, right? Melody Robe was the best robe in the entire game for a PvE player on all 7 schools, right? Now, there might be a couple of pieces, like, the Amulet from the Hunhow, that's like meta in PvP, or like the Void Boots were in PvP for a bit in Raid 1, and stuff like that. So there's a couple of meta pieces typically within the raid, and I don't think it's a lot. It's maybe like 2 or 3, 4 max. It's never like we need all 7 pieces of raid gear, I would say, which I guess is kind of cool. But my point is to illustrate, like, if you want to get the top of the line stats, you kind of are forced in a position where you have to raid and you have to, find a guild and get in there and, coordinate with 12 other people, Now, I think this is a big turnoff to a lot of players that are casual, because even me, I'm a guy that likes to solo. I like being rewarded for, like, solo challenges in general, but I have no option to solo and, like, get the Melody Robe or get the Shabalba wand, So I think just a lot of people, might show that sentiment of, I don't want to, like, be in a guild, I don't want to be around a bunch of other people and worry about the stress. I just want to, like, do some hard content that I could maybe solo and get some pretty cool, good, and unique gear, right? So my point is, even though there's only a couple of pieces that are meta per raid, I would say, it's still locked behind an extremely high barrier to entry within the raid, which leads me into my next point. The barrier to entry, which is literally a raid key, right? So before you even get into the raid, you need to have 12 different people, typically adults, maybe teenagers, right? Coordinate a day and a time of a time span of 3 hours to be on, right? You have to have a whole strategy. You have to all have cantrips to hit magic touch, and ideally cantrips for fights as well, right? In the Crying Sky Raid, you need fishing as well, okay? You need, like, to hit the stat maxes, which again could be very challenging as well. You could even talk about a bunch of, like, little item cards. You need, like, 35 bubbles for Storm, Fire, for example, as well. Little things like that, or like dual blade sockets as well. A lot of things. And then the key itself is always a pain in the ass, because you also have to do monstrology, like the dinosaurs, which are a pain in the ass with the Crying Sky raid, and like a whopping like 400 or 600 Azoth. So what's gonna happen usually, well, not always, but generally from my experience, is you'll have 2 to 3 people work on getting the Azoth or the key, and then, you know, some other people might help out with the monstrology, but it's never the fact of the matter all like 12 people are helping to make the key, ever, from what I've noticed, right? Now, there are some exceptions. When you finish the raid, everybody gives Azoth to one guy, and you save that for the next key, right? But typically, you're gonna have to go back and farm more, which is maybe like 1, 2, or 3 people that I've seen and noticed, even after you give the Azoth back to one guy for the next raid game. So, I think the Azoth amount is just too high. I think the Metrology is a huge pain in the ass as well. Also, I think you have to do like a quest for the Crying Sky raid, which, I mean, it was cool reading some of the lore, I'm not gonna lie, but it's just like, it's almost just like an inconvenience, because like, you have to do the quest, to even like, what is it? You have to do the quest to like make the key or something, which I think is just extremely dumb, right? I was gonna make the key on my death today, when I was raiding, and then I actually couldn't because I didn't do the quest, and then I didn't have time to do the quest because we had to raid. So it's just a big pain in the ass is my point. The key, way too high, too expensive to make the key. And then in general, having to have every part of the game and like have meta stats, just really demanding, right? So that's just before you get into the raid. We're not even into the raid yet, okay guys? So, next thing, alright, you go through the portal, you hit the magic touch. Okay, now depending on which raid you're in, which is the Void or the Crying Sky raid, as of the time I am recording this audio, you will either have to go Vanguard or be outside team on the Void one, or if you're on a Crying Sky raid, depending on your strat, you just have to freaking all go your own separate ways typically, unless you're doing drums right away, and then everybody has to know exactly where they're going, their routine, like, you know, east for drums, then fishing, then pods, then fishing, then south, then the boss fight, then the stupefy. Like, it's extremely demanding, and even some of the guides out there from, I think we use, what, Dauntless Ducks, I think, in our guild, or the Raptors, like, they do a very good job explaining it, right? The people that have made the guides for the raids do a great job explaining it, right? For how confusing the damn thing is, right? You gotta recognize that. So I do appreciate that. But at the same time, you can like read a guide and still kind of get confused where you need to go, right? And it's kind of hard to make a guide and be like, oh, well, you go here, 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 because in the Crying Sky raid, for example, it's always random, okay? And you can make that argument about, I guess, the Void raid too. To an extent. I mean, I guess the Void raid wasn't too random compared to Crying Sky raid, but the point is, it's kind of really hard to make a guide on things when there's so much RNG involved within like the Crying Sky raid, and that RNG makes it more inaccessible for, well, the more casual players and even the high rank players. It just really frustrates them in general in the game. So I think in general the Crying Sky raid had way too much RNG going for it as well. Next thing I want to talk about are bugs within the raid. So the Crying Sky raid was like bugged for the first month when it came out. You literally could not get past the North fight, I'm pretty sure is what it was, and tons of other little bugs as well. There's still bugs in the raid right now. Like, for example, when I did my raid, we had a firefish, but I could not see the firefish, so we went out and got another firefish, but we had a firefish, but it did not display the firefish, so like I couldn't tell we had the firefish, you know? So when you have stuff be this inaccessible and there's just little bugs like that, it is extremely frustrating and soul crushing, right? If you just look back to the start of the Crying Sky raid, right? You had so many people hyped, right? Probably the best soundtrack, top 5 soundtracks in Wizard101. Okay, banger, right? The vibe, the atmosphere, really cool, right? Maybe the map's too big, but really cool, like, aesthetic, really good music, really good theme. Okay, I don't want to take any credit away from King Sal for that. But when you have these bugs and all this hype and like a cool trailer for the raid too, and then the whole thing is literally undoable for a month, you're gonna see a lot of players quit, which is what happened, right? Including myself. I was having so much fun figuring out this raid, and a lot of other guilds people were as well. But what you saw happen is because of how buggy it was. Basically, so many people quit and got burned out, and then there's only like 2 guilds left to figure it out, and they took like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 months, I think. No disrespect to those guilds, obviously they did worlds first on Crying Sky raid, so really good to them. But my point is, you had so much hype and you did so much right, and then it came out and there's buggy, and like I guess there wasn't an update fast enough to like keep the hype going and like not make players burned out, because people just kept, they wanted to raid, right? They wanted to raid, they kept going, the bug kept happening, so it's just like, it's a pain in the ass. And you might be like, oh, we'll stop raiding if there's a bug, you know, just wait till it's fixed. But like, dude, you gotta understand the hype is died down by then, you know? So I guess what I'm saying is I really like to see more polish on, you know, within the next raid, which I think is coming summer 2024. I think that was confirmed. I could be wrong though. So I think there needs to be a lot more polishing for a product that's this high of a barrier to entry and inaccessible. I will say that. Another thing I want to talk about on the topic of barrier to entry is, well, I guess you could talk about the Roaring Raptor strat, which I think is like the best one in the game right now. I guess that's subjective, but basically they pretty much win almost every time, and they have a very good way to mitigate RNG and just get around things, which again, respect to them for figuring that out. However, I think 11 of them, or 12 maybe, they all have to like cosplay in dual school. Now, the issue with cosplay in dual school is you have to have 2 or 3 maxes, which is either like a death myth, or somebody else, I think. But you have to have one of those schools. You have to have the correct template of gear, the best pins, the optimized setup down to the percentile, right? And like pets and jewels and shit. Like the barrier to entry for that, and it's for all 12 members. It's not just like maybe 4 or 6 like you might see in some other guilds. Like no, all 12 people need to have that, you know, with respect to the Raptors, that nerdy shit, you know? So it's just, the barrier to entry is just, again, way too high, and I think they really jumped too far from the first raid to this one. The Crying Sky raid feels like this should have been the 3rd or 4th raid in terms of difficulty, right? We jumped too far. We turned the dial too far for, you know, accessibility and difficulty in the raid, in my opinion, and RNG as well. So yeah, I feel like that's really everything I want to say. I guess you could talk about cantrips too, right? You need to have cantrips level 7 on everybody. You have to have the cantrips made. You have to time them right. It's just a pain in the ass, the whole thing. So this is kind of a raid rant video, I guess. Not really what I wanted it to be, but that's really everything I have to say for the video, guys. If I left anything out, let me know in the comments below, please. I would say most people would agree the first raid is better than the second one. Even though I really, like I said, the second one was very hype, the trailer. I love top 5 soundtrack. I actually really like Azteca in terms of the theme, right? So this raid should have topped the Dragonspire raid for me. However, when the product is that buggy and unplayable and you burn your players out, it's kind of going to leave a bad taste in your mouth, you know? So I really hope it doesn't happen again. I really hope they can find ways to make the raid more accessible, and just less frustrating with RNG and everything in the next raid, and maybe dial things back a tad bit, not a lot, because I do like the difficulty, just a tad bit. I think they just went too far with this one. So yeah, let me know your thoughts and feedback down there in the comments below, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching, and take care.